Welcome back to HACR's Leadership Pipeline Program. Now, please welcome to the stage HACR's Vice President of Administration, Vanessa Bowling Ajavan.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch and the lunch programming, and those watching, I hope you enjoyed your lunch as well. I do want to let you all know, I don't know if you heard my colleague Ileana Ruiz yesterday saying how much she loved the social media wall. I do want to say I also love it, but there's one problem. There are no selfies of me on that wall. So, please, you have, until 7 o'clock p.m. Please find me, take a picture with me, post it using the hashtag HACRLPP22, and just give me one moment. You at home, please go ahead and screenshot. I'm going to give you a pose. Got it. Okay. Now, please feel free to show your photo editing skills off. I want to see those on there too. Okay? Oh, extra points if you get one with me and Sid. All right? So first, before we get started, I want to welcome a video from our sponsor, Nationwide.
Our unique difference is our associates. From the top of the house to the front line, we share a commitment to diversity and inclusion. We also recognize that diversity and inclusion is a journey, with wins and celebrations along the way. We retain associates because of our inclusive culture, a culture that not only provides a safe, fair, and trusting environment, but also an environment that provides equal access to opportunities. At Nationwide, diversity and inclusion is simply who we are. We intentionally create an environment where everyone can bring their best self to work. We purposefully invest in a culture that lifts all. We know when we have an inclusive culture, a culture that values and respects all, and where everyone proudly brings their differences to work each day, it's these differences that create fresh ideas, drive business success, and fuel innovation. Our associates will continue to elevate our inclusive culture by providing extraordinary care to each other, our customers, partners, and communities. Because of our associates, we have a culture of caring that makes a difference. We remain deeply committed to continuing to grow our diverse and inclusive workplace. And we'll continue to ask for and listen to feedback from our associates. I could not be more excited and energized about our future. I am so proud to work for a company that has an unwavering commitment to diversity and inclusion with intentionality and purpose. There is power in appreciating and embracing difference. Our unique differences make us a stronger company.
Thank you again to our sponsor, Nationwide. Now, I just want to add a little personal note. I do want to thank you all for all of the words of encouragement that you have given me since yesterday. So many people have come out after I shared some of my intersections to tell me their corporate coming out stories or to tell me how they are an ally. And I want to make sure that you know that is always appreciated and to please bring that back to your companies to know that it is very important to remain vocal with support. Also, if I'm giving unsolicited advice, I would like to say, please remember that we are all not one-dimensional. We are all multifaceted diamonds. Today, to share some of her facets, in the session called Owning Our Intersectionality, Global Partnership Lead, Ola, at LinkedIn, Jasmine Garcia. Please join me in welcoming her.
Hi, everyone. How are you today? Medio calladitos. You're like, we already had lunch. We had that steak. Ya estamos. I have to say, and I have to start off with this, that it's just such a blessing to be on this stage today because, and I shared it with some of you kind of, when we were chatting it up during breakfast. I was in your seats back in 2015, 8 years ago now, as a CHCI fellow. And I remember sitting there, I was a fellow, gonna work on the Hill, and I'm like, man, I wanna be on stage one day, and I wanna work in corporate America. I don't know how that's gonna look like or what the path is, but I'm gonna do it. And here I am today. So it's kind of wild, but we're here. And even more so because today I am very proud of the fact that whenever I go to in any room at LinkedIn, in external meetings, I can confidently introduce myself as a queer woman, Mexican American with Yaqui roots, Christian, and I don't feel like there's gonna be any backlash. Like, I feel okay in my spirit, in the space. I also recognize that that's a privilege, right? I look a certain way. And I take that with me, like I said, in every single meeting, but I'm very comfortable with that respect. I also, or parts of me, is that I'm a daughter of a predominantly single-parent household. I am a big sister of 3, and I'm a partner. Now, what do I do on the daily, right? I work at LinkedIn, very proud about that. I am a account executive within our vertical markets team, and I also serve and lead with our Latinx CRG, Hispanic of LinkedIn Alliance. I do have one of my colleagues here, very proud about that. I also serve on our nonprofit action committee and a couple of other areas that I volunteer in. I talk about that too because I remember for the longest, from 8 years ago, I thought that, programs and whatnot is the only way that I could, because it's what I'm passionate about, that's the way I could make a living. And then I learned, no, you can be in sales, make a living, and then do everything else that you're passionate about, right? What my daily looks like at LinkedIn is I talk to executives, executive directors, VPs of HR, VPs of learning and development at nonprofits, and every single day, I get to practice my executive presence. I also, very fortunately, and I think this is quite literally the best example you can think of someone kind of bringing you up because they've been in that space, is being selected to take this leadership role with OLA, our Latinx ERG, because I was only 6 months in seat. And they were like, you know what, you can do this. And I'm like, globally? I've never done anything globally, but I guess I'll figure it out. And it's been a success. It's been a great time. Through that role, I've been able to connect with leadership that in a million years I wouldn't think of. 6 months in seat, and I was having one-on-one conversations with our VP of Talent Solutions, Mark Labasco, who also happens to be a sponsor of our Latinx ERG. I was having meetings or leadership training sessions through what we call CEO sessions. And think of it as business school. You start talking business, strategy, communication with the likes of Executive Chairman Jeff Weiner. You talk to our SVP, Chief Operations Officer, Daniel Shapiro, and our VP of DIBS, Rosanna Duruthi. Again, I'm 6 months in seat, and I've already been exposed, build relationships with these leaders. That's my daily, and you're probably wondering now, well, how did you get there, right? How am I using all those parts of my identity that I talk about being queer, that I talk about being Christian, that I talk about being a female? How did that even come to be, right? Because it didn't happen overnight. It happened 8 years, right? When I was growing up, it was binationally. I'm from San Diego, California, born and raised, very proud about that. But for a couple of years when I was growing up, we had to live in Tijuana. And that meant that I'm probably 6, 7 years old, and I'm wondering, I'm like, why do I have to cross the border every single day to go to school? What's going on? And that, you can imagine, prompts this passion for social impact or just kind of justice of like, why do I have to do this? This can't possibly be the narrative for everyone. And so then I start studying political science. I went to the University of San Diego, and I got into this fellowship program with CHCI, and it was CHCI that completely transformed my life, because we had a couple sessions there where we talked about our story. And I'm like, oh my gosh, nobody wants to hear my story. Like, we're here to work. This is business, right? It doesn't matter. Ya cerrada. I was like, no, I don't have to talk about myself. Like, I kept wanting to keep it split, personal and professional, right? Well, that was a slap in the face because you can't keep it separate. There's no such thing. And back in 2015, outside of the fellowship, what also happened was I more or less came out. I hate that term, but it's a thing. I started dating a woman, and for me, it was just like, well, I'm dating another human being, it's fine. But for others, they needed to label me to understand what my relationship was or what did it mean, right? And I remember distinctly being so angry when I would hear someone call me a lesbian or that I was queer. And that should tell you right there, just because you're in a relationship with someone doesn't mean that you're comfortable with your identity, which again, I wasn't. And so it was that situation. It was other couple situations at work that I'm like, okay, well, what's wrong? Like, I want to be in a certain position of leadership, and I'm getting to see all these incredible examples of what leadership looks like. Well, how do I get there and also have like my own flair and twist to it, right? Long story short, I end up going into therapy, and I start learning some really raw truths about myself. And I'll share three examples that really just kind of transformed the story. One of them is, many of you may kind of, are familiar with this, but I'm very resourceful. You're probably also very resourceful in your own roles. And I thought it's a good trait to have, but the reason I was so resourceful is because when I was younger, I had to figure it out. So when you're in the workplace and you're expecting others to also figure it out, you forget that that's not what they grew up with. They probably didn't have to figure it out, right? So that was one. I easily, through therapy, learned something that was hindering me was now becoming an asset, slowly but surely, right? Another one was, say a colleague or a direct report made me upset. One of my defaults, unfortunately, was to ignore them. Why did I do that? Because if my mom got mad at me, then she would ignore me and give me the silent treatment. But I didn't know that until we were talking about it in therapy. And then one of the hardest truths to kind of deal with was, I remember, I've always been a fan of makeup, just, exploring it, what it does, like art, all of that. But I strategically have worn eyelashes because, I don't know mine because mine aren't that long, because I didn't want my eyes to look too small because I felt I looked too indigenous. And I didn't want to look like that in an office, right? I have Yaqui roots. And that was something very hard to come to terms with. I'm like, why would I be embarrassed about the way I look or the way my family comes from or anything like that? And then I remembered, oh, well, you went to a predominantly white institution and all of these spaces are white, so obviously you have this idea of what beauty is or acceptance is, and it's not reality, it's not truth, or it shouldn't be your truth, right? And so that was therapy. A lot of, again, it felt like I literally was walking around like an open wound. Every single day back in 2019 felt like I was just getting stabbed in the heart, because reality was just showing itself. And so much so that it got to the point where I became so uncomfortable that this is where my faith plays in. I'm like, all right, let's move. I'm clearly not growing here anymore. I don't really necessarily like it here. I'm thriving in ways that I don't want to be thriving in. So let's go. And God placed it in my heart, and I moved to Chicago. I love Chicago. It's incredible. Very, very happy there. Other messy things happened there where what I did, again, just to really believe in myself, invest in myself, is I quit a full-time job. At this time, it was the most money I had been making, the most money my parents combined had been making, and I started over. I took on an internship in Chicago, and that internship turned into a full-time job with another organization, and I focused on just growing my skills. I'm like, I'm just gonna focus in that. But something pivotal also happened in that time. Again, I didn't know anyone in Chicago, but one of my managers, I will never forget him, David Pesquera, he also of indigenous background, very confidently in white spaces would come in and introduce himself, like saying, hey, orale, you know, and I'm like, oh, how are you doing that? Like, you're not embarrassed? Like, shh, I don't know you. But mind you, he was, I don't want to like share his age and make him feel old, but he was older and wiser. And I'm like, wow, like this person can come into this space and feel so confident, I can do that. And so wearing, you know, my red poncho, my red lips, my hoops, my whatever, what felt that was close to my culture and my identity felt okay finally in these spaces. And so I started exploring different ways of what it meant to show up as authentically me, right? Again, it could be very much externally, but it also meant of just like, again, how I would show up and what I would share about myself in these spaces. Let's see. For me, what ended up happening, you know, 3 years after being in Chicago, or 2 years actually, because we're in the third year now, is I end up having a coffee with someone at LinkedIn. You know, that ends up turning into a role, but something pivotal happened in my interview that I will also never forget. And that was when who ended up being my boss, but no longer is my boss, but a great mentor, he's like, listen, I'm just gonna be straight with you. It's you and another person, why you? And I looked at him straight in the eye, and I'm like, listen, because you can't replicate me. I've done the work, I know my traumas, I know how they play out in the workplace, and I know how to check myself at this point. I'm queer, I'm Mexican American with Yaqui roots, Christian, female, I'm Jasmine, and I'm gonna deliver for you and the team and the organization. And I'm telling you right now, no one can do it like me. And now I'm there. So see, for me, at the end of the day, showing up authentically means I can wear my red lips, the hoops, because it makes me feel confident. It means I can opt for sneakers instead of heels because I feel more comfortable and I can talk. It means that after closing a deal, I can say that was all God and not feel ashamed of it. And it also means that whenever we're talking about like, hey, this is what I did on the weekend, I can say confidently, I went with my girlfriend, my partner, and we did this, and I'm not afraid about any backlash. Like, I feel okay. Now, I have 3 takeaways from my story. If you remember nothing else, remember this, basically. Pursue therapy and invest in yourself. I definitely took advantage. I was 23, 24 around this time where I took on therapy. I also took on executive leadership coaching. I invested in myself. No nonprofit was gonna invest that type of money for me, but I did it. And so whatever that may mean for you, again, therapy, coaching, do it. The introspection and how you maneuver in spaces thereafter is a 360, quite literally. Second one, do not separate the personal from the professional. There's no such thing. As much as you may try, I guarantee you will expend more energy doing that than just being yourself wholeheartedly. And finally, you belong. Whoever you are, whatever it looks like, you belong. I was told this when I was sitting in that seat back in 2015, that I belonged, and every single time I feel like, oh, maybe not because I'm literally the only Latina sitting there, the only queer Latina. I'm like, this is weird, I shouldn't talk. I remember that because I'm like, yes, I do belong. Your experience, your perspective is important, and it's transformational, and diverse teams truly do succeed. Thank you. Now I think we have Q&A. Mike, I can't really see. Okay. Excuse
me. Hello, I am Eileen. I'm a data scientist at Chevron. I am also a former intern at LinkedIn. You talked about labels and the labels that people gave you that maybe you didn't identify with or you're angry about. Can you tell us a little bit about how we can rebrand ourselves to have labels that more accurately fit us?
That's such a great question. I think that it might be a little embarrassing, but not really. I did a lot of research. I'm not going to lie, I didn't necessarily know what queer meant, or a lesbian, or the whole spectrum. And so for me personally, I did that research of what does each word mean, especially to others, because if they're using it, I would hope that they would know what it means. And so if that felt comfortable, because outside of being queer, I also identify as pansexual, right? Like I'm not a lesbian, so that's why it would also bother me when that's what I was called. But people don't know that. Like you have to tell them that, educate them, right? So I would recommend, like in the most basic form, research. Then you start connecting with whatever you're finding. Oh, this sounds more like me. And then attach it to your brand. I'm also very strategic. Like on LinkedIn, I did not know this, that they used my profile as an example, but I'm like, I would hope I worked there, like that it looks good. But I did a lot of research on, well, if I want to have speaking engagements as an example, that's something I want to pursue. Or if I want to be in sales, or I want to be a leader in X, well then these are the key words that someone's probably using some kind of system to find me, and that's how I want to be found. So that would be my number one recommendation. I think there was another one right here in the middle.
That was great, but I might be biased because I am her colleague. My question was around, obviously I know your involvement in the ERGs, and there's a lot of companies that do a lot and a lot of companies that do a little, and being a part of an ERG does create that sense of belonging. For those people that are in the room and who are listening in that may not be in a company that has communities that they can seek, what's some of the advice that you would give them to potentially seek that in their own organizations?
Thank you, Liana. That question really kind of, I kid you not, I think it was last night or this morning, checked me, because I am so privileged to be at LinkedIn. Like whether it was my manager or our ERG, I felt supported, and I have felt supported along the whole way. So my recommendation would be, because this was not the story for me in every single job that I've had, is someone alluded to it before, but really finding your other board of directors and finding them as mentors. Like you don't always have to find it within your org. Corporate is different, right? Because you have to have sponsors, everything. Like someone has to be talking about you. So whether it's another ERG, you'd be surprised too. I know we have one for families, right, at LinkedIn. Maybe there's a family ERG that you have there. Find somewhere else that if it's not very directly tied to your identity, find a connection there. And then also I would just have to say it at one point probably has to be external. If you're not finding that support within your team, within an external team, or for me, right, if I'm in sales, but I'm in sales for vertical markets, I've also explored sales in corporate, our corporate enterprise relations and mentorships there or sponsors there. So that'd be my recommendation.
We have a question from the virtual audience. Your journey with therapy sounds very courageous. How did your family take your embarkment on your journey?
Ooh, that's deep. But we're a family here, right? It's been difficult. I love my mom to death, but she was very much of the sentiment, you don't need therapy. And still till this day is no lo necesitas. So it's still a difficult conversation to have. Thankfully, my mom, when I came out, she did not question. She was just like, why are you crying? You're just dating another person. I'm so confused. And I'm like, wow, this is such a blessing. So there are there's some parts where super accepting, very much an advocate, but then other parts, it's just, there's a lot of trauma there, so they themselves aren't ready. And I'm not about to push them either. I've seen it, of what it looks like when you try to push someone else to do something that just because it worked for you, right? So still a difficult journey, conversation with my family. I think it's more receptive with my younger sisters, which I think that's more important when we talk about going through therapy. breaking generational trauma, curses, all of that. I want to have a family, and I don't want them to be burdened on like what I experienced, right? I also learned something that if people don't know about, like trauma in utero, that's a thing. I will be frank with you. At one point, I was like, yeah, I just have daddy issues because I had a like absent father. No, they were like, no, the issue's with your mom. I was like, wow, okay. And my mom is my best friend. Don't get me wrong, she's my best friend. Literally, like the only reason I'm also standing up here, like, is because of her. She sacrificed so much. But that's what I learned in therapy too. So, and I tell my mom about these things sometimes. Like, I will never forget to the time that I was like, yeah, I identify as pansexual, or I was exploring, you know, other parts of the spectrum. And she's like, what? She's like, no, like, we're not talking about this anymore. Like, I don't know what this is. Like, te voy a colgar. I'm like, okay, we'll talk about that later. And I just started laughing, and I kid you not, then I posted it on Instagram and went on this rant, and then found out that, like, a lot of us go through that too. But I mean, think about it. We're very traditional. Like, I was baptized Roman Catholic, and I'm very proudly presenting here, right, like, as a Christian. So it's an involvement. And just like, I'm comfortable talking about it with my family, because at the end of the day, like, we're family, you know? And thankfully, like, they're open to at least have some part of the conversation, even if it's not the full part. And hopefully we'll have more years to have those conversations.
Hi, Jasmine, right over here, back here. Yes.
I see, kind of.
Thank you for being here. My name is Jai Vargas, Vice President here at HACR. I love the fact that you're so comfortable and confident in sharing your story with therapy and your different intersectionalities and identity. I too have had a lot of experience in coming out and seeking therapy, a lot within my family as well. Can you share with us some examples of what organizations can do to help us as Latinx professionals, people with multiple intersectionalities, and what LinkedIn did for you to help you feel like you belong, even though it's a very transparent and fun and really inclusive place to work, as we know, but what did they do for you that made you feel okay enough to share so much of this?
Yeah, I think it started before the interview. I mean, it was a whole circle of things. Leading up to like one of my final interviews, I had spoke to 3 men of color, and all we talked about was like social impact and the good that we wanted to do, and literally it was chill conversations. It was about their backgrounds and what they were passionate about. It wasn't necessarily about business. Little did I know it was actually part of my interview, you know, like when you're networking like that. But that was one part of it. And then my actual interview for who ended up being my boss, he too was super confident and okay. Like, he shares part of his story. He's also the global co-chair of our Latinx ERG and doing tremendous work there. But think about it, like, right, like if I come from a background of working at nonprofits, Latinx nonprofits at that, and then I'm meeting all these, you know, people of color, and then you have the manager right there, like the person I'm gonna be reporting to, who is also like my mentor and a sponsor, and, you know, doing all of that, like, and he's okay sharing his story. And then I mentioned to someone else earlier, I mean, we get it's 3 to 4 months of quite literally just training to do your job. And that training isn't just to do your job, but it's just to get familiarized with what our culture is at LinkedIn. There was a lot of focus on wellness. I also shared with a couple of folks earlier, I mean, I feel like we always have like every other Friday off. We have what you call in days. And seeing examples, like, I mean, Ileana herself, right? Also sales manager on the corporate side, right? She very confidently shows up, you know, talks to our VPs and does what she does. So I'm like, again, I see her doing it, I can do it too. And outside of that, like, there's always just conversations. You can literally tell that it comes from the very top, because my manager, a white woman, is very direct when we're trying to like, there's never, how do you say, a time where we don't talk about a DIBS journey or your experience or your identity. At the start of the quarter, I think, or when she started, because I have a new manager now, she had, she did it first, but she recommended all of us, I'm a group of 6 or so, and for our immediate team, and we did an identity session for all of us to understand what are the parts of our identity. And she sets the stage, right? Like, she is the role model. So at every single level, I mean, we're talking about like executive team, and then how it trickles down to the directors and then the managers, and then each person in each vertical market, what have you, like, it literally is embodied and shown through every single person. I can't help but being like, okay, well, like, let me show you who I am, you know? And then there's tons of different programs. I mean, my therapy is fully paid for. We have a program called Lyra through LinkedIn, and I've definitely used that. We have tons of, like I mentioned, tons of different ERGs. I have a leadership capacity with Ola, but we also have Enable In that I've, you know, talked to and done some things with, which is what's for our disability awareness folks. And then there's also, like I said, Families at LinkedIn. There's just various different support groups. It's trickled down through various leadership and just people at the organization, and resources, like galore. So hopefully that answered your question.
We have another question from our virtual audience. How can ERGs collaborate for people who do have multiple intersectional identities?
Oh, wow, give me a hard one. I think collaborate, right? Like, right, just in the last response that I gave, I've worked at places where we did have, you know, some kind of semblance, or we created it ourselves, of just support groups or just other people that look like us. But at LinkedIn, there's constantly, you know, one ERG partnering with another one, recognizing that there's different parts of your identity, right? So I'll give you an example, actually, that just happened last Friday, 2 Fridays ago. We had, it's Halloween, so there was this just events galore at LinkedIn. I brought my partner's family, and something that really stood out to me was, that was, again, put on by Families at LinkedIn, so all of, you know, anybody who's a parent or had a cousin, brother, whatever, they brought their family to LinkedIn to just have food, music, yeah, reptiles, it was crazy. We were all just hanging out, we all dressed up, it was amazing. But our OLAT ERG also had an entire table of, you know, representing Dia de los Muertos, and there were some books and stickers and just individuals there to explaining, right, because there's folks that may be able or may dress up a certain way, right, for Halloween, but they were being educated on a part of our identity and our story, and it's like, this is not a costume, this is what this is. And I thought that was powerful. Like, that right there is an example of like why I identify as a Latina, and I'm just, you know, I have a family, and they collaborated and put this big event together and educated folks, right? So I think that's quite literally just one example. There could be a bigger one, but that's one.
Thank you. We also have another question. We hear so much about the mental health crisis now. How can companies support mental health for all?
Ooh. Having honest conversations. Something else that I've really enjoyed about working at LinkedIn is, and because I literally had to break this like out of myself, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm very direct. So when it's business, I'm like, it's business. And I also did the Discovery Insights, so I'm a red, if you know what that means. My boss is very much a green. We cannot start a meeting without her being like, how was your weekend? How was this? How was that? And sometimes it frustrates me, but more often than that, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's like, I'm a human being. Like, she's checking in on me. It doesn't always just have to be business. You don't always have to be direct. And going back to my earlier point, it's replicated literally throughout every single part of the org. Say, for example, we have monthly leadership meetings with Ola, and that's the same thing too. If something happened nationally within the team, like, people are so aware, it's mind-blowing at LinkedIn. It really is, because I have not been part of a meeting where if something's going on, we don't address it first. We're like, okay, yes, we have an agenda, but let's check in on how you're doing. You know, X, Y, and Z is happening. How are you feeling? But like, how are you really doing? And sometimes if that derails the whole conversation, then the agenda goes by and then we'll just reschedule another meeting, because at that point, someone needed to cry and we just let it out. And you just don't see that happen anywhere else, right? Like, I mean, I've seen it, thankfully, blessed over here with LinkedIn that we do that, but that would be my recommendation of just like recognizing. And that's why I also did my introduction where I told you who I was and then I told you what I did, because it wasn't until I got to LinkedIn that I understood I'm not a human doing, I'm a human being.
And this will be our last question. What is your favorite part of working for LinkedIn?
Since I didn't already share so many. Personally, I really do have to say, I've always been obsessed with strategy. Literally just having conversations with people of like, how can we find a solution? Going back to being so resourceful, right? Like I just love finding solutions, and that's what I do every single day. I know we had this conversation too with other folks about this pressure that exists, particularly when you're in sales, of you have to hit a quota and you have to do this, and which we do still have to hit quotas. We're a business, but it's very different. We talk a lot about strategy. When I meet with a nonprofit, it's more about, well, what's your business need? And then if LinkedIn can help, cool. But then if it can't, then I'm frank with you, then we can't, right? So that's my daily, and that's what I really enjoy doing. Like, even if I had a really long, stressful day, I'm like, okay, well, I help this nonprofit because I know what they do. And at one point, they're going to get that hire through our platform. So that's what I love to do. You good? Okay, since that was the last question, now it's my pleasure to reintroduce, I believe, Monica Diaz back to the stage.